Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. Today's webinar is the fifth in our FTCOE webinar series, Opioid Crisis, a Public Health Enemy. Rates of opioid use and misuse have reached epidemic proportions and are impacting many aspects of both criminal justice and forensic science programs. Opioid addiction is the driving force behind this increase, in use with nearly 3 million Americans reporting a substance use disorder to prescription pain relievers or heroin in 2015, fueling a steady increase in fatalities to an estimated 91 U.S. deaths daily. These rates are not slowing. Rather, they are doubling, quadrupling, or undergoing even more alarming increases in some areas. Law enforcement, medical professionals, laboratories, and legal agencies are battling with unmanageable caseloads, economic shortfalls, and challenges for safety, analytical preparedness, and basic education and training. Reliable surveillance and intelligence are needed more than they have ever been, confronted with the fast-paced emerging drug life cycles. The legislative quagmire is just as burdensome, as policy change cannot happen without the data to support change. This webinar series will bring a multifaceted perspective to how diverse criminal justice disciplines are addressing these challenges, sharing their knowledge, and advancing science, technology, and law. Dealing with the impacts of the opioid crisis to the criminal justice system requires better reporting, surveillance, research, technology, and policy than are currently in use. The need to understand the epidemic and its effects goes beyond knowing your own profession. It takes a global perspective to fully act and make a difference. My name is Josh Vickers, and I will be your technical host for today's webinar. Today's webinar we're very excited to bring you is Dreamland. Sam Quinones explores America's opiate epidemic. Today's presenter is a well-renowned and award-winning author. Mr. Sam Quinones is a Los Angeles-based freelance journalist and author of 3 books of narrative nonfiction, of which his latest is titled Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. It was published in 2015. Dreamland won a National Book Critics Circle Award for the Best Nonfiction Book of 2015. It was also selected as one of the best books by numerous organizations in 2015, some of which Amazon.com, Slate.com, Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg Business. Sam is formerly a reporter with the LA Times, where he worked for 10 years from 2004 to 2014. He is a veteran reporter on immigration, gangs, and drug trafficking, among many things. I'll just go through our quick disclaimer. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to switch everyone's layout. Again, we're extremely excited to bring you Sam Quinones today. He is going to be bringing up his webcam. We can see you great, Sam. Please go ahead and take it away. We're excited to hear what you have to say.
All right, Josh, thanks so much. First, one little business thing. I have an office in my garage where I am right now, and my neighbor outside is doing some sawing. So if you hear that and that becomes annoying to people, just let me know and I'll close the door. It's kind of hot, so I like to let the breeze in, but it's not a problem. So anyway, thanks to you all for tuning in. Thanks, Josh and Jerry, for arranging this. Very happy to be speaking to you guys who are all, it seems to me from what I understand, all of you are on the front lines of this problem, coast to coast, it looks like, from where you all are chiming in from. So what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about how I perceive this whole thing to have gotten started, and then and some of the I think the larger lessons or the larger issues that were behind it. And then we can, questions, comments, criticisms, anything is valid. I hope to get comments that you have. I'm happy to address them as best I can in the time that we have. I think the roots of this problem go back to the 1980s, really even before, when we as a country, the medical establishment in this country, really did a very poor job of treating pain. The pain specialty was really something that was just emerging in the late 70s, really, and as something that needed to be studied. And I think a group of young Turk doctors entering medicine for, I think, more or less the right reasons, became disappointed, I guess, with the way these things were the way pain was being treated in this country, and began to believe that there was no reason for that. That we had medicine, we had pills, tools that could help doctors assuage pain, but we were, as a country, afraid to use them because we were afraid of addiction. And this, my hunch is, my sense is that this seared a lot of these doctors early on. They became revolutionaries in reaction to this very, very oppressive, suffocating status quo that they saw in medicine at the time. And I think what ended up happening was they became kind of revolutionaries and wanted to push a lot of doors down. And I think in the long run, maybe the evidence didn't matter as much as knocking those doors down. They began to believe that first of all, we did do a bad job of treating pain, and the tools that we had were cheap and readily available, and these were opiate or opioid painkillers, which you're very familiar, I'm sure by now. I think they were then, they spent a lot of time kind of developing a collective conscience at conferences, at seminars around the country, meeting each other, saying, "Yeah, I agree. This is kind of not right." And the first thing they knocked over, I think, was the idea that these drugs should not be given to people who were dying of terminal cancer pain, or should not be given people who were dying of cancer. They argued, what did it matter if these people were addicted if they were actually able to live their last few months of their life in some relatively pain-free way, a humane, decent way? And that made a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to me, in fact. But I think what happened was they kept on pushing, and they began to make the argument that these pills were now now known to be virtually non-addictive when used to treat pain. The problem, and the reason that they felt they had to make that argument, was because they were trying to knock down these old ways of thinking that were in the way, old and in the way as they saw it, I think. And that, I think, is why we are here today. They didn't kind of stop and give a more measured response to this problem. They said, no, let's just knock the whole thing over and push on. And they began to argue that these pills are virtually non-addictive when used to treat pain. As I said, also connected to that is the idea that if they're not addictive when used to treat pain, then it doesn't really matter how many of the pills you prescribe. They were then joined in this by, of course, the companies that make these pills, who naturally saw them as allies. Each side saw each other as the ally in this fight. The pharmaceutical companies were making these great new tools with which to treat pain. The pain specialists and the young folks coming up in medicine were there very aggressively wanting to use these new tools, and they kind of combined together. They didn't, however, have much evidence of that what they were saying was true. They famously used a letter to the editor from the New England Journal of Medicine, written by a guy I interviewed, Dr. Herschel Jick. Dr. Jick, many years before, still does, he's still alive, had run a patient, a database of patient hospital records, and he got used to asking this database questions about how drugs were used while in hospital. And he asked them this data one day, how many patients had been prescribed narcotic painkillers while in hospital, and then how many of those patients were then addicted. And the first number was 11,000 plus, second number was 4. He writes this up in a 101-word letter to the editor, very famous letter now. But at the time, he didn't think anything of it, just wrote it up in a letter to the editor, and they published it in 1980 in the New England Journal of Medicine. At the back of the book, under the heading, Addiction Rare in Patients Treated with Narcotics. And this is about the only evidence that these pain specialists can't come up with, printed, documented evidence. They begin to use this in conferences, in seminars, quote it, footnote it, cite it. At last glance, I think it was up to there's one little letter to the editor, quickly forgotten by the author, Dr. Jick, at Boston University, was cited something on the order of 900 times. It became a report. It became a study. It was kind of like a game of telephone almost. A study. Then it was a landmark report, and finally it was a landmark study that Time Magazine in 2001 called a study that does much to change what we know about addiction, and on and on. None of this was true. It was a letter to the editor, yet it became this major cornerstone, the intellectual cornerstone, in a sense, for this pain revolution that takes place, begins to gain momentum in the late 80s, really gains momentum through the 1990s. Of course, part of this, though, is change connected to this, I think, and I'll talk about more of this later, but part of this is what's connected to all this is major changes in American culture and society. We won the Cold War. There's a feeling among Americans that we want to kind of kick back. We don't want to have to be bothered with complication and discomfort and difficulty. We just we're the kind of the kings of the world. We deserve some ease, an easy life, and easy solutions. We don't want complication anymore. There's the ideas grow up that this influences medicine to a great degree. I think people come to medicine believing increasingly that doctors are car mechanics. Our bodies are cars, and we want the doctor to fix us. And it doesn't really matter what method they use, only that if they're going to ask a lot of us, that we're going to rebel against that idea. That they say, well, part of your pain is because you're overweight, or you smoke, or eat too much junk food, or you don't get enough exercise, and all. You have to change certain behaviors of your that are contributing to this pain. We rebel against that as a culture, I think, and we say, no, we don't want that. This is increasingly, I think, what's happening in clinics and hospitals across America, and I think doctors are very strongly feeling this. There's the idea that pain now is very famously quoted by a nurse at the time, gained a lot of prominence. Pain is what the patient says it is, when he says it is, and where he says it is. So the patient is almost king of the clinic, of the appointment, and the doctor is increasingly had to kind of defer to the patient's wishes. There are these very well-known now doctor evaluations, press Gini scores that patients fill out, sometimes by hand, sometimes by computer, sometimes by phone, with a very blunt instrument evaluations. And all they do is they really ask, did your doctor treat your pain well? And if the answer is no, well, that doctor can these have economic consequences on doctors. They can lose their hospital privileges. They might be fired from their practice. Whatever it is, there's a lot of effect of these evaluations. But what they really become, as this growing acceptance of opiates as routine tools for treating all manner of pain, and gradually it gains momentum through the 1990s. These evaluations become manners of extorting pills from doctors. If you don't give me the pills that I think I need, I'm going to give you a bad evaluation, doc, and it's all going to be, you're going to feel the effect. In 1996, along comes OxyContin. OxyContin changes a lot of things. One of the ways it's a game changer is in the way it was promoted. It was promoted for the first time. You have an opiate, a very powerful painkiller, narcotic painkiller, promoted to doctors as if it was an over-the-counter medicine. So this is a time when the pharmaceutical industry is exploding, hiring huge numbers of new drug reps, sales reps to go around. So in 1993, we have 30,000 drug sales reps nationwide. By 2003, we have 120,000. And they're tripping over each other, and they're getting younger, and they're more like car salesmen than maybe the drug sales folks of 15, 20 years before. If go-go, it's a go-go time, and you're always trying to butter up the staff to get to the doctor, and you're giving away stuff. And so with OxyContin, they gave away hats, fishing hats, which you can see on eBay and places like that, saying this is. This is the drug to start with and stay with, OxyContin. Calendars, they gave trips to Scottsdale and Florida for continuing medical education. There was a famous CD called that with the title "Swing in the Right Direction with OxyContin," and on the cover was a couple, an older elderly couple in a garden, walking, holding hands, happy. And the CD was a bunch of swing band tunes, appealing to the doctors of that age that they had to convince, because a lot of those doctors had gone to medical school where they learned you never ever prescribe these pills, almost never. And they wanted to push that pendulum the other way, and they wanted to get doctors used to prescribing these pills for all manner of things. And the marketing idea was that OxyContin is the drug to start with and stay with. You don't switch. This solves a lot of your problems, particularly now as doctors are mightily under the gun due to managed care. They don't have enough time with their patients. Certain patients, pain patients in particular, are taking up huge amounts of their time, and that is a real problem for a lot of these docs. They really do have this problem. It's not a minor thing, the amount of time they have to spend on pain patients. At the same time, you're getting Americans increasingly saying, I want easy, I want uncomplicated, I want you to give me a solution that I can then that doesn't require a lot of work on my part, because I don't want to actually have to change my behavior. I don't want to have to change I don't want to be personally accountable, essentially. I think we were gradually losing our own personal accountability when it comes to our own wellness and health. And this is part of larger changes I think I'll talk about in just a minute. But what ends up happening is clearly that marketing works. Marketing just works, and pretty soon we are having pills prescribed for wisdom tooth extraction, it's not just that they're prescribed after a surgery, which would be normal for maybe a day or two, but they're prescribed because they're no longer known to be addictive when used to treat pain. It doesn't matter how many of these pills you get. So people are going home from routine surgery with 30 days worth of pills, and then another refill, and then maybe another refill after that. You're getting 90 pills, you're getting 60, you're getting way too many for the small, very short window of 3 to 4 days of pain that you're probably going to be experiencing. And this begins to happen all across the country. We become a country that goes from almost never prescribing these to the world's leading consumer of these pills. And in 1990, the total world supply of hydrocodone, which is in Vicodin and some others, was 3 tons world supply, total world supply. By 2010, 20 years later, it's 43 tons, I think it is, 43 tons, and 99% of that is used right here in the United States. That's a revolution, and that is really what happens. You multiply these small, minor operations times millions and millions of Americans every year, and what happens is an enormous new supply of opiates is unleashed on the country. Very potent, and it's without nuance. It's pills for everybody, no matter what your background, no matter what your body type, your history, your pain history, the history of addiction in your family, going back to your grandparents. None of that seems to matter. It's just pills for everybody, for every kind of these kinds of pain, and lots of them at the same time. As this is happening, though, we didn't notice, or we had forgotten a major historical event that took place in the 1980s. And that was a huge change to our heroin markets in America. For decades, most of our heroin, a lot of it came from the Far East. It came from Turkey, it came from Burma, it came from Thailand. Some of it did come from Mexico, but it was fairly rudimentary organizations down there for a long time. The stuff that came from the Far East, because it had a long way to go, changed hands many times, it gets here expensive and weak. In the 1980s, all that changes. The heroin, remember the 1980s, this is when the Colombian cartels are extraordinarily fierce and very, very effective at trafficking. The Mexican groups are not quite cartels, but they're certainly developing efficiencies, and they're becoming good at what they do too. These two groups essentially begin they're so close by that they're able to outcompete drugs coming from other parts of the world, and heroin definitely is one of the main ones where they do that. The heroin that starts coming up from Latin America, from Colombia and from Mexico, increasingly is cheaper, much cheaper by a factor of I think it's like a seventh. Eventually, is according to graphs that I've seen. And it's far, far more potent. And in time, what happens is, it's like any business, they have a better product. In the eyes of a heroin addict, someone who is selling a cheaper and much more potent kind of heroin is selling a better kind of heroin, and they outcompete all that heroin coming from the Far East. And so what ends up happening is that it's just replaced by the stuff coming from Colombia and increasingly, of course, from Mexico. This is extraordinarily important. First of all, nobody notices this change. Nobody cares about, in the 1980s, early 1990s, nobody cares about heroin in America. It's a minor drug. Crack is the big thing. Meth, then, marijuana, of course, all the other drugs, But heroin is way, way down. So no one really pays attention to this historic change that has taken place. By the early 1990s, almost all of our heroin comes from Colombia or from Mexico. Along comes, of course, then this pain revolution, the opiate painkiller revolution in modern medicine, and in fact, people begin to get addicted. They get addicted in a wide variety of ways, but all of it is due to enormous new supplies of these drugs, these pills, in medicine cabinets, on the street, in hospital clinics. It's all due to that. People get addicted by following the prescription and the doctor's orders, and they just take too many of these. They keep taking them, and they end up getting addicted. A lot of this dope ends up being stolen from medicine cabinets and finding its way one way or another into black market. They buy it on the street. It's high school parties. It's locker rooms, high school or college locker rooms. There's a million different ways people get addicted to this. And it goes from coast to coast. It's all over the country. This new supply. Now, none of this would be a problem had it not been for OxyContin. OxyContin is the bridge. Before OxyContin, people would mess around with low-dose Percocet or Lortab or Vicodin or one of those, but they all had acetaminophen or Tylenol in them. Now, before they could develop a very desperate, serious daily habit, they'd done massive damage to their internal organs, and so not a lot of people made that switch, that desperate switch to heroin, until OxyContin comes along. OxyContin contains no abuse deterrent, certainly for the first, 14 years of its life, contains no abuse deterrent, and so it takes people up to it's the bridge. It takes people from small dose habits a day with Percocet and Vicodin up to very, very large, 150, 200, 300 milligrams a day for a while. They're getting that from their doctors, but maybe they lose their insurance. Maybe the doctor gets scared, says, no, I can't give you this anymore. Whatever happens, there's a lot of reasons. They eventually have to go to the street where these pills now have a burgeoning, very robust black market, and that is going for $1. They're going for $1 a milligram, and that is way too high when you're doing 150, 200, 300 milligrams a day for people to sustain. They look around for a cheap yet equally, if not more potent alternative, and that is when that change that took place in the 1980s in our heroin market becomes hugely, hugely important. It becomes very relevant. Now, we would not have a heroin problem in America today, I don't think, were it not for OxyContin, period. But we would also not have the kind of heroin problem we have today, where most of our supply is still coming from the Far East and getting here very expensive and very weak. The Mexican heroin, increasingly it became Mexican heroin as the years passed. Certainly by now it's almost entirely Mexican heroin, Mexican sourcing. Gets here very potent, very cheap, and easy to find all over the country. And that is when but it's OxyContin that makes that change important. OxyContin takes people's habits up to very high levels that they cannot economically sustain, and they look around, and that heroin from Mexico is a fifth the price, sometimes even cheaper, and it becomes the great source of that switch. And so the first place you see people switching from pills to heroin and then dying, I think, which I wrote about in my book, is Huntington, West Virginia, in the fall of 2007. And you saw in a 6-month period, a dozen people die of overdoses to black tar heroin from Mexico within a 6-month period, all of whom had started on pills first in one way or another. Accidents, paying prescriptions, street procurement, whatever it was. That's how they got their dope. But remember, these pills were already killing huge numbers of people. It's very famously known now that we have more of the opiate drug overdoses than we have traffic fatalities, and that is an amazing change. That was never the case. Since the emergence of the automobile in America, the automobile has always been the source of the most fatal accidents, accidental death in America. That ended in 2007-8, right in there, and it was almost entirely due to pills. So people say, well, we should not have cracked back on the pills. I'm like, well, I don't know. Those pills were killing a lot of people. Heroin was not part of the picture in 2007 and 8 as much as it is today. It was to a certain degree, but a small amount. And so heroin, though, of course, does take it to new lengths, and I believe it's what has helped galvanize public fear and outrage and all this. Another reason that I think is connected very closely to the work you all do, to why this got started, is because it took place in states that have too many counties. The first ground zero for all this was Columbus to the north, Cincinnati to the west, West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, eastern Tennessee, a lot of Virginia, maybe southern Indiana. That whole area right in there is really ground zero for where this is first heavily promoted. OxyContin's first heavily promoted by Purdue Pharma in those areas, knowing that a lot of doctors are already prescribing all kinds of pills for their patients who are going through a lot of economic pain as well as physical pain. But if you look at all those states have too many counties. Ohio's 88 counties. West Virginia has 55 for less than 2 million people, 55 counties. 92 counties in Indiana, 120 counties in Kentucky, 95 counties in Tennessee. Why is that important? That's important because those counties are so thin that they do not have the proper budget or staff to properly run frequently coroner's offices or medical examiner offices. And that becomes essential. That becomes the only place we're going to see this taking place in the country, because this epidemic has no violence associated, very, very little violence associated with it. I was a crime reporter during the crack epidemic, and that's what you covered. You covered mainly the public violent expression of the crack epidemic, which was drive-by shootings, carjackings, big lines of dealers, everything in public. The crack house, an old house taken over after the renters leave and the crack user take it over. You have skyrocketing crime rates, homicide rates. Everything is public. That's one way we knew we had an epidemic. But with this one, we have almost none of that. We also have parents who are absolutely mortified, don't want to say anything about it, want to keep it all very hush-hush and under wraps. They don't want anybody to know that their kid died on a toilet in a McDonald's bathroom. They don't want to know anyone to know that their kids were sent off to Wyoming for rehab. So they invent, fabricate obituaries. So there's nobody out front saying our kids are dying. On the contrary, people are saying our kids didn't die of that. They died of a heart attack or died suddenly at home, right? And so, and also the drug dealers were very obvious during the crack epidemic. You could see them. I saw them all the time in the town where I lived, where I was a reporter. But here it's doctors that were the main source of the drugs. The heroin traffickers, when they later came, were very, very under the radar. They really wanted to maintain a very, very low profile, and I write a lot about them in my book as well. So where then are we going to find evidence that we are under siege, some kind of drug scourge, some kind of drug epidemic? And that is at coroner's offices. The problem is that this takes place in areas where coroner's offices are underfunded because they're small counties. These are smallish counties. They don't have, plus there's the farm crisis, then there's the Rust Belt, the deindustrialization, globalization. All of these leave a lot of these counties just flat on their back, budgetarily, politically. They don't have a lot of talent pool either to choose from, so they don't have a lot of doctors. So frequently, the person who becomes the coroner or the ME, the coroner, is usually an ER doc, an internal medicine doc, somebody like that. In some areas, it's the funeral home director, whatever it is. But whatever the case, it's that very bulwark that, because it's underfunded, because it's funded according to specific county tax base, that leaves us extraordinarily vulnerable. We do not get the proper data when this thing is first emerging, the late 90s, early 2000s, well into it. We're well into it before the numbers begin to make sense. When I think early on, had we had well-funded, well kind of put together coroner's offices, medical examiner offices, we would have seen this emerge a lot sooner. But it's in those states. It starts in those states where if you look at the map, they just have too many counties and they're just underfunded. They don't have the tax base. They don't have the people. And also in those small counties, there is the tendency, and I'm not quite sure how often this happens, but there is the tendency. You know the doc. You know everyone goes to church together. They go to the same businesses. When your son dies, you feel like maybe it's okay to go by the guy who's the ER doc, but also the coroner, and say, I prefer that you not put a real cause of death about why my son died, and we can find some other cause of death, because I don't want people to know how he really died. So all of this is part of I think why we are where we are, how we got to where we are. I'll say one final thing, and that is about where we've come since I wrote the book. When I wrote the book, I did not really include anything on fentanyl. And that was because I finished my book in, I think it was just before Thanksgiving of 2014. And most of you know, if you're dealing with fentanyl at all, it's really after that. It's really end of 2015, early 2016, when the scourge of fentanyl really hits in a big way. Before that, yeah, you'd find people with the patches, chewing on the patches, or that kind of thing, trying to get the fentanyl patches to leak, or just get more access to the dope right off the bat. But it's really in the last year and a half, 2 years, I think, when fentanyl, particularly powder, in a powder form, particularly in its analogs form, with dozens and dozens now new bizarre analogs have made it onto the market. Where they're coming from is still an open question. I mean, I think what's happened is fentanyl has democratized the opiate industry, or the heroin industry, in a sense. It used to be heroin, particularly when it came from Mexico, was about 4 or 5 states. That's where they grew the poppy. That's where people knew how to harvest it. That's where all the heroin was. And that's in the Pacific Northwest, Sinaloa, Nayarit, Durango, Michoacan, Guerrero, those states right there. Fentanyl you can make anywhere. You could make it in Bangkok. You could make it in Nebraska. You can make it in some warehouse in Mexico. And so it's democratized the problem and made it, for that very reason, so much more scary. Added to that, of course, as you all know, is it's extraordinarily lethal, particularly in powder form when you can inhale it. And then, of course, you have it now on the dark web. I'm a tech idiot, I think most people would tell you, but I did have a guy show me around the dark web and send me screenshots of the dark web a couple of dark web marketplaces selling fentanyl for, just like eBay or Amazon, selling fentanyl for $50 a gram or something like this, 3 grams for $100 in Bitcoin, of course. I saw fentanyl offered for a kilo of fentanyl for $12,500, all offered by anonymous people on an anonymous dark web market, all through the mails, and so that is now where we stand. New analogs coming out like every week or month, it seems. It's just an extraordinarily scary thing. Carfentanil, which is not an analog to fentanyl, it's a different kind of drug, but it's an anesthetic for rhinoceroses and elephants. They did a study a while back. Carfentanil is now being found in levels that used to kill people in Ohio. They did a study of people stopped for DUI, and they found that 49 people of those 150 people they stopped had levels of carfentanil that would have killed people a year earlier. And now they're developed some kind of apparently a tolerance to this stuff. But that's the new rampant mortality that we're now seeing, that I suspect may be with us for a couple of years more, that is straining your offices to the breaking point. Is now happening because I think we have created an enormous supply of new addicts dating back to the late 1990s. They switched over to heroin, and then of course you get unscrupulous folks in the black market, the underworld, willing to provide very potent heroin. And then of course willing to provide much more profitable, very potent, of course, fentanyl and its numerous analogs. I will end on a bright note, and that is that when I was writing this book, my feeling was that the book would be completely ignored and die when it came out, because nobody that I was talking to wanted to talk about it. As I was saying, there was a silence, parental silence, familial silence. No one wanted to talk about how their brother died or how their husband died or their son or whatever. And that has changed. And now that is a very, very healthy thing. And I think as law enforcement, public health, this country as a culture would do well to marshal those forces, to recruit those people, to talk about this more frequently. It's, as a member of the media, I was concerned because I know that if you don't have parents talking, you really don't have much. And I was thinking, I found 5 parents who wanted to talk about how their children or loved ones died. And I put them all in the book, but that's 5 among thousands and thousands. Now I think you're seeing on Facebook, people come out of the woodwork. You're seeing people tell the truth in obituaries. And that, I think, is the great new change, the very positive, exciting new change that I would suggest, as simply as a reporter, that I would suggest is something that we all need to take advantage of, particularly folks in law enforcement, public health. Get them to tell their stories. Be the face of this epidemic. Otherwise, it does seem faithless. And with that, I think I'll end. I want to say thanks very much for listening to me. I'm happy to answer any questions that Josh wants to to throw my way, or comments or critiques, whatever you like.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. We've had so many questions come in already. We're going to start the first one off, kind of put you on the spot a little bit. I know during your research of the book, you dealt a lot with the trade coming in from Mexico. Do you feel that the current administration's idea of building a wall would actually curb some of that coming in from Mexico, or is the problem much more sophisticated than that?
No. Look, all the heroin, you need to understand, the border is lined with walls. There's already many walls along the border. People are not running across the desert with packs of heroin on their back where there are no walls. There are some areas that don't have walls, but they're usually very geographically forbidding. Like it's very difficult, like for example, Tijuana, in between San Diego and Tijuana, where I just was yesterday, there are two walls, right? One starts in the ocean, goes for 14 miles, and ends at a big mountain. And so they didn't build a wall over the mountain because that's a very difficult thing to traffic. You can, but it's very difficult to traffic people or goods down that mountain. You could be seen for a long way when you're coming down the mountain. So all of our heroin comes through areas that already have walls, right? It comes through Juarez. There's a river and wall at fence or whatever you want to call it. It's a fairly sturdy thing. I was down in South Texas in McAllen, across from Reynosa, Mexico, and they have a very strong big wall there. But still the heroin gets through because it's packed. That's because heroin is the easiest drug of all the four major drugs to traffic. It's easier to traffic in small amounts. It's very profitable to do that. You can cut it when you get it up here and sell it for a very, very nice profit. It's not as well controlled. For years anyway, it's not as well controlled down there in Mexico by the different cartels. It was kind of more of an independent business. I think a lot of Mexican drug trafficking is in fact a lot of more independent than strictly cartel related. And so it's already coming through walls. People are not swimming across the Rio Grande with 20 kilos of heroin on their backs. That's just not what happens. And so another wall, I don't know. I don't see how that could, unless of course you want to shut down trade between the two countries. That's another option, but that would be so devastating to large parts of our economy. Our farmers would be up in arms in a minute over that because a lot of what they sell goes to Mexico. A lot of our cars that we put together here in Tennessee or in Michigan or wherever, a lot of those parts come from Mexico. So it's not. It does not seem to me to make a lick of sense. I lived 10 years in Mexico. And I don't have any illusions about the country. I'm not one that, poor Mexico, you're a poor country, so we should just take a pass on all your missteps. No, I think we need to be engaged with Mexico. We need to be speaking bluntly and forcefully as friends to Mexico, but still bluntly. We also need to understand that every person, not every person, but geez, so many people down there who are murdered with guns procured in the United States or ammunition or both, procured in the United States. We need to understand that this is a binational problem. Mexico has a drug problem. We have a drug problem. We have the same drug problem, different effects in either side of the border, but we need to learn to come together with Mexico in a way that I don't think any president yet has done in my lifetime. And certainly this talk of a wall is the opposite of what needs to happen, in my opinion.
The trade, heroin, and prescription painkillers. Do you have any idea on what the percentage is of street use and abuse that comes from legal prescription painkillers that turn into addiction abuse rather than just street use and experimentation?
I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure that exists, but anecdotally, I could say it seems very high. It seems lots of people sold their prescriptions on the street, for example. I think initially a lot of the ways this got going was that seniors would sell a chunk of their prescription to somebody. And then you have also the situation of people using these pills for this new kind of pain treatment. Wisdom tooth extraction stands out. I seem to have met, I don't know, 24 people now who have gotten addicted by the pills that they were given when they had their wisdom teeth extracted. I spoke with a reporter in Vermont who did a story on the drug court in his town, and he said, I interviewed 6 clients of the drug court. All 6 were heroin addicts. All 6 had started with the pills that they got from having their wisdom teeth extracted. So I don't know, but it seems very high, and it seems to me to this story confirms what change what I believe. When I lived in Mexico, I thought all our problems were demand driven. It's easy to believe that in Mexico because Mexico wants to believe that they have no culpability in this drug problem, this binational drug problem. It's just those Americans with their insatiable dope demand up there. The truth is, I think, that the supply starts drug problems. And this is a perfect example of it. Remember, the greatest drug that's abused in America is alcohol, and it's because it's so cheap and plentiful, right? Well, this is a story that begins, we did not have this problem before. Huge amounts of supply of opiates were unleashed on the country. The supply came from prescription bottles and doctors prescribing them excessively, and in all manner of pain cases frequently weren't really the right thing to do, or certainly in such quantity. So to me, this is a supply story, and that's why I say we can say that we are not going to arrest our way out of this, but the problem is you cannot treat your way out of this either. So long as supply is this massive beast out on the street, it's very difficult to expect addicts to get out of treatment and go back to those streets awash in dope, where they know how to get 2 or 3 kinds of dope around the corner from them, or they know a million ways to get it, and expect them to remain clean and sober. So this means that there is a very, very strong role for law enforcement in all this, as the folks who must attack the supply, because you cannot expect treatment to work if every place people go, right, they're met by this huge amount of very, very addictive, very brainwashing kind of substances.
Great writing and bold reporting on such a dangerous topic. He wanted to know how an entire industry got away with using a weak single source to establish their basis for non-addictive properties for something that was obviously so addictive.
Thank you. I think that's where a lot of the cultural aspect of the changes in America come in. Doctors remember, this is now, managed care. So you've got certain blocks of time for people, and you don't have more than that. You have, meanwhile, patients, we Americans, not wanting to take care of ourselves, really thinking that we could just do it the easy way. I really believe that, and so there's lots and lots of pressures on doctors to change. A lot of them never really did. They just had to kind of go along with the program. The whole time they're thinking, this is nuts. That's crazy. I didn't mention it, but during all this, they came up with the idea that pain should now be considered the 5th vital sign. Pain is not a vital sign. You can live with pain. You cannot live without a pulse. But the idea was to push doctors to think in terms of treating pain first and foremost, and that there were consequences if they did not. So all of this kind of lends itself to this idea that we need to find a tool. And by the way, we have one. Actually, we've had one all along, and science now knows. And it was very easy. I think the people I've talked to who are in the middle of medicine and during those years say it was just people wanted to believe. It was a case of where they had so many pressures on them that people just wanted to believe this, and then all of a sudden, pain specialists come along and say, I'm now giving you all permission to use the pills that you never would use before because you knew they were so addictive. Now we know. And how do we know? Porter and Jick, it's my impression, was this letter I referred to, became a letter, a thing that was like passed around at almost at cocktail parties. No one ever read it. No one ever read that letter. I mean, a very small number of people read that letter because it was tucked away in an edition of the 1980 New England Journal of Medicine in January 1980. No one was going to go back into those dusty files. This was before the internet. Even after the internet, I called the New England Journal of Medicine, and it wasn't until 2010 that they put the entire archive up online. So before that, if you wanted to find something from the 1980s, you had to go into some dusty library, go to the medical school in your town. I mean, nobody had time for that. So everyone starts mentioning Porter and Jick, and then it was almost like, I can imagine that it must have been maybe almost like you were uncool if you were at a conference and people were talking about Porter and Jick, and you didn't know what Porter and Jick was. So it was like, oh yeah, well, of course, Porter and Jick, of course that makes a lot of sense. I always knew that was right, that kind of thing. And it becomes this kind of reinforcing thing, reinforced, I think, a lot by our desire to have it easy, to have it quick. And that is, I don't know, to me, that's a big part of this story. One of the main things I took away from it was that we all need to, one lesson is we need to be accountable to for our own personal wellness. I stopped drinking sodas during the middle of this book. I stopped drinking sodas and sugary teas and all that stuff, cut back on a lot of the junk food that I was eating, began swimming more often, all as a way of saying, if you want to be the change you want to see, this is the one way to do it.
Big question. In your opinion, on this opiate epidemic, where can we place the blame? Is it pharmaceutical companies, the prescribing physicians, or is it the users for the supply and the demand?
It's I try to be, as a reporter, someone who values and perceives or attempts to perceive the nuance in stories. I believe that that's how human interaction works. I do not subscribe to the bogeyman theory of history, where you can point to one person and say, "Yep, that's the guy who did it all. He's the blame." That's where you get populism. That's where you get a lot of mistakes. I've seen it work badly in many countries, Mexico being one, by the way. Pharmaceutical companies, I'm sure knew what they were doing, or if they didn't, they didn't want to question it too much, and so they let this, they just pushed this and pushed this. They began hiring, everybody began hiring more and more of these sales reps, and they began to inundate doctors. Doctors, meanwhile, are under a lot of pressure. Some of them want it easy. They don't want to do very creative medicine. Yeah, it's really great. All I have to do is prescribe pills to everybody who walks in the door almost. I mean, that's one approach that a lot of people used. Again, I do believe that Americans wanted it easy. This was also a time when we believed in all kinds of, like, the old rules don't apply to us, right? I bring this up in my talks a lot. This was a time when we believed that more than that several baseball players could hit more than 60 home runs a year. It happened twice in the history of the sport, and now we're believing that it's normal for it to happen 3 or 4 times a year or whatever, and periodically. We believe that you put all these bad performing home loans into one security, and you stamp that security AAA, and that's a magnificent place to put your retirement money or invest your money in bad performing home loans. And we believe that if you widely prescribe opiate painkillers all across the country to all manner of people, the same kind of pills over and over and over, this will not somehow lead to widespread opiate addiction. I mean, at the same time, I think what also was happening is, as a country, we became terrified of pain. especially for our kids, you know? The kids, we bubble wrap them. We make sure that nothing bad ever happens. We give them trophies just for showing up. No kids are ever playing outside because, you know, there's probably child molesters behind every street, every tree. There was a couple that was prosecuted a while back, a few years ago, for letting their daughters go to a park alone. You know, there's this feeling like we have to protect our kids from every bad consequence, from skinning their knees to hearing some disturbing idea in the college classroom. This fear of pain in all its manifestations. You know, pain is physical pain, but also emotional, psychological pain, social pain. God forbid I be on the baseball team and not get a trophy, even though I was really not one of the best players by quite a bit. You know, all of this became part of our culture. We wanted to be protected from pain in every sense of the term. This is a big part. That's why I believe one thing that struck me as I got into this book was that when you write about heroin, this whole problem, when we write about this whole epidemic, you're not writing about drug trafficking so much. That's part of it. You're not writing so much about drug marketing, although that's part of it. It's really an attempt you really have an opportunity to write about America and who we are and what we become as Americans. And I think we crossed the high plains in Conestoga wagons. We won World War II with 11 million people in the army and people sacrificing for years. And now any little bit of pain is just intolerable, and we are therefore entitled to complain about it and question our institutions when we have to suffer it, the least little bit of it. And God forbid our kids ever come upon a painful idea or not be treated as the most valuable player on every team they are on. All of this is part of, I think, the culture that surrounds this has been part of this epidemic, and why it's very difficult to say who is to blame.
Companies. What is your prediction about the result of some of the lawsuits that the state attorney generals are pursuing against the pharmaceutical companies for their role in the proliferation of the prescription opioids?
Well, the answer is I have no idea. Okay, this is very different from the tobacco thing. Tobacco really has no legitimate medical use. These pills have I would not be in favor of banning these pills, by the way. These pills have very, very legitimate medical use. We could not do surgery without these pills. There's many uses they have. They just have been those uses have expanded enormously far beyond what's real, I think, or realistic. So the problem I think a lot of these suits are going to find is that, and this is coming as a layman, I am not an attorney, I don't know, nor am I deeply familiar with the theories behind these cases, but that it's going to be hard to prove that doctors were not following standard medical practice at the time, accepted medical practice at the time when they were doing this, because that was accepted medical practice. It's hard to say that these pills have no medical justification or medical use. They most certainly do. So I have no idea. I do know that, though, that this is a problem that has been, the profits for which have been made by the private sector, pharmaceutical companies primarily, and the costs of which are all borne by the public. Jails, coroner's offices, public health nurses, cops, prosecutors, on and on and on. All the costs of bearing this scourge have been borne by the public sector. So what they are trying to do, in a sense, is right price those pills. Those pills, the cost of those pills, the real cost, the true societal cost of those pills, is not reflected in their price. Their price is artificially low. And so these counties and towns and states are trying to find ways of getting money to help them pay for what they alone are having to bear. And that makes a very effective argument, I would imagine, in a courtroom. Although I'm not an attorney, so I really don't have a sense for how this is going to play out at all. There's so many of them now too. Mississippi, upstate New York. I mean, at every place time, almost every other day or so,
we'll
I'm
follow up
hearing
a
somebody
bit,
else
regarding
begin to file suit, a county, what have you.
And the threshold for pain. Do you think that the doctors are kind of looking at people's pain thresholds a lot lower than they used to? It sounds like you do. Many people had their wisdom teeth taken out years ago, given mild painkillers that were sufficient for the couple days of pain. Why do you feel like now they're prescribing such strong drugs for minor procedures?
I think in part it was what I was talking about earlier, just a bit ago, that people, their patients are have a horrible reaction to pain. They just don't want to feel pain, or they don't want their kids. And mostly, it's like they don't want their kids to feel pain. And so, football is now a gateway to heroin addiction. In America, that's an amazing statement, but I think it's true. That's how, because people tend to kind of throw these pills at people, doctors or trainers or what have you, tend to throw these pills at players, and so they end up getting addicted. I think largely it's because of that. I had all four of my wisdom teeth taken out in 1987, and I think it was, I can't remember what I was given at the moment, but I'm pretty sure it was not an opiate. I'm pretty sure it was ibuprofen or something like that. But I do believe, again, this is what I get into, the cultural shift that is behind this scourge means that this is more than just simply a story of drug marketing and pharmaceutical and drug trafficking and pharmaceutical marketing. It's deeper than that. It's about who we are as a country, where we come to, and I think that one way of getting away from that is beginning to again show some accountability for our own health, and not rely on pills so much, and not and get more exercise, and these kinds of things. But it's I mean, this is a complicated cultural phenomenon. That's why I don't think it's easy to say that so and so is to blame. There is certainly blame that you can apportion to some groups and industries, most definitely.
Questions,
but it's much larger than that too.
Wrap things up. The first, you had mentioned the Purdue lawsuit in 2007. How much, if any, did the reformulation of Oxy have on the abuse problem after that lawsuit?
My understanding is that was a fair amount, in fact. The people, but see, by then, what that meant was that by then there were huge numbers of people who were addicted to it, who were abusing it already. And so to not reformulate it would have been a mistake. The real issue is they should have reformulated it back in '96. I mean, that was a little bit after the horses had left the barn, by then. What strikes me about that is when they finally do it, people start switching in huge numbers to heroin. That was already a transition that was underway, by the way. That was not new in 2010. It had been going on ever since those pills had come out. And the heroin traffickers I write about in my book realized that early on, and that's why I wrote about them. They were in that area, had figured out that if they just follow the pills, they would eventually have a really huge heroin market, and they were finding that heroin market in 2001, 2, 3, 4, right in there. And so the change that OxyContin went through, I think, probably was a necessary one. Should have been done years before. They should never have marketed it without that. I don't think gone to market without that. But it did accelerate. I don't think there's any doubt that it did accelerate the transition to heroin, and that was when I think a lot of people began to realize, oh wow, recognize that shift that had taken place in our heroin markets in the 1980s. We did that without taking full account of
you had mentioned,
all the factors that might play into that.
Interviews that You got into journalism because of the story, because of the chase of the story. During your research for this book, what was your biggest wow moment, your biggest surprise that you were not expecting while doing your research on this opioid epidemic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, well, the first one, well, I would say that letter. That letter never ceases to blow my mind. I mean, I cannot believe that an entire industry, using very little except for that letter, there was a couple other pieces of evidence, and that was evidence in quotation marks, of course. That was it. It was really that letter and that unfortunate headline that was used. I spent a month wandering around in a daze talking about, like, is this possible? Do you think that this entire thing could have happened because of this little 101 word letter? The other, though, was I do a lot of, when I write about, I've written a lot about Mexico, and write a lot about gangs and drug trafficking and stuff like that. And so when I do, I end up writing to people in prison a lot. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. You always have to reach out to people in prison if you're writing crime stories. And I do that an awful lot. And with this, to write about the Mexican traffickers, who we didn't really even get a chance to go into at all, but I explain a lot about in the book. I wrote to, I think, I can't remember anymore, it's something like 25 to 40 of these guys who were doing time in prison. And the one guy who really saved the book was a guy that I call him the Man in the book. I can't tell you his name, so I call him the Man. And he was the first guy to bring black tar heroin east of the Mississippi River from this one town in Mexico. And he does so at the very moment, very coincidentally, no conspiracy here. Just happened to land in Columbus, Ohio, during the time when Purdue and all these other companies were pushing opiate painkillers. The pill mill thing was exploding. Didn't really get a chance to talk about that either here, but that's also in the book. And that the pain revolution was way underway. But right in this ground zero, he lands in ground zero with very potent, very cheap black tar heroin from his town in Mexico, and he's clued into. He begins to sell to a heroin addict, and she is making a lot of her money by buying pills from seniors who get prescriptions in Wheeling, West Virginia, and going up into the mountains of West Virginia and selling those pills for triple. It's already, this is 1998. This is already happening. And he sees that and realizes then that the pills will create a heroin market more vast than anything he's had on the western side of the United States, where the markets are all very limited. The number of heroin addicts is pretty stable in each town. It's not really growing at all. But out there in the ground zero, all of a sudden, if he follows the pills, he will come upon a market unlike he's ever possibly imagined. And that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens. And all that heroin that kills those people in Huntington, West Virginia, is heroin that he or others from the town where he's from bring to Columbus, Ohio, and the Huntington addicts go up to Columbus to buy the dope. Anyway, it was finding him that made me think, like, oh my God, this is an enormous story, and the kind of thing that you kind of almost live for as a reporter. You're onto some huge story that nobody else is telling.
We're going to close up.
And to me, that was
do you have any
very, very exciting.
Last-minute closing statements for our audience today before we do wrap up?
My pleasure. Well, I would say that as coroners or people who work in forensic pathology, it sounds like a lot of you are in law enforcement. I want to say thanks very much for your hard work. I know that this is a thing that is just of staggering proportions, almost in every part of the country, and I know how hard you all work. on this, and I know that it's very, very difficult. I do believe that you need to be public. I think you need to be telling your story. If you're the local coroner in town or the medical examiner or what have you, you need to be telling those stories, the stories of what you're seeing on the autopsy table. A lot. Frequently, folks in that line of work are not used to the limelight, not used to talking to the media. I think you got to do it. You got to recruit those parents. You got to be part of the public health approach and response to this problem. You guys are right there on the front lines, and I appreciate greatly what you do. You have
so
fascinating
much, Sam.
jobs, and
we're thrilled to have you on today.
and I
Really
want to just say
appreciate it.
thanks very much for doing them. Pleasure was mine. Pleasure was mine, and you guys can find me on my website, which is samquinones.com.
Thanks, Sam. We appreciate it. We're
Very
gonna,
easily.
go
I'm on
ahead and switch
Facebook.
over
I'm
to
on
our
Twitter
closing
too.
now.
So feel free to
Again,
follow
Sam
me or
Quinones,
whatever
everyone, thank you
on
so
social media
much.
if you like.
As Sam said, we do have web links down there on the very bottom of your screen, www.samquinones.com. Make sure to go there, check it out. You can purchase all 3 of his books, especially the last one, Dreamland. They're from his site, and he's got his contact information there as well should you have any follow-up questions. We also have our website down there, forensiccoe.org. We are recording this. It is archived, so it's going to be a great reference for anybody to go back and watch anytime that they would like. Again, we would like to thank Sam Quinones for his presentation today and taking time out of his day to do that. We cannot say our gratitude enough. We would also like to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. These webinars would not be possible without your attendance, so thank you very much for coming. Before you do leave today, we do have our customer satisfaction survey there. If you just click on the word here, it will bring up our satisfaction survey. It's vital information that we use to provide you the best webinar experience possible, also to adjust content or dissemination of how we deliver the information to you. This was kind of a new webinar with Sam being live there on the video, so definitely let us know what you thought about that. Again, we did record this as part of our opioid series, so make sure to check out our website and check out all of the archivals. Sam's will be up there in the next couple of days, and also all of the future live courses that we have in the opioid series and just in forensics in general. Again, thank you so much, Sam. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Make sure to check us out on our webpage as well as Facebook, Twitter. Sam mentioned that he is on Facebook and Twitter as well, so make sure you follow him so you can stay up to date with everything that he's doing and that we are doing as well. Again, thank you, everyone, for attending, and we hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon.